All right, Gerard Robinson, thank you for making another virtual appearance in Kansas. It's wonderful to always have you here, whether it's virtual or in person. You testified on an education savings account a couple of weeks ago in the Kansas legislature. And then a couple of years ago, maybe even more than a couple now, you came and told about your experience as the Commissioner of Education in Florida, Commissioner of Education in Virginia, about the importance of school choice in bringing more opportunities to families in Kansas and the experience in Florida. So welcome back.
No, it's always great to be with you. It's virtual this time. We look forward to breaking bread with you in person at some point, hopefully this year. It looks like it's going to be a good year for parental choice in your state and across the country.
Absolutely. We certainly hope so. It's kind of the mad rush. The first legislative deadline is this week. So we don't know where that ESA or there's a tax credit scholarship expansion, some of those other things will be percolating. But one of the things that we've heard talked about, I know it's something that you've dealt with your time as the executive director of the Black Alliance for Educational Options, is this idea that school choice is racist. So let's just get right to the heart of it. When you hear that kind of a claim, you know, what goes through your mind? Is that this is only an opportunity for families who don't want to, you know, have, you know, call it, you know, integrated schools. They're just looking for an escape hatch so that their kids don't have to go to school with other folks. How do you respond to that?
Well, there's definitely what I call an era of two parental choice movements. One is what I call fear-based choice, and the second one is what I call freedom-based choice. So let's deal with the first, fear-based choice. There was definitely a period in the United States history where there were families who said, listen, I'm going to utilize parental choice as an exit option, not to go to school with other people's children, not to go to public schools, or basically to stick the thumb into the eye of leadership who told me I should. So when did that period take place? So Kansas, your state knows a lot about this issue. Yeah. So in 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that separate but unequal in public education really had no place. And so your state was one of the plaintiffs in the case. I'm in Virginia, so Prince Edward County was as well. And so then you had Brown v. Board of Education in 1955, what we call Brown 2. Well, 1956, guess what? There were over 100 members of the U.S. Congress who signed a document. It's known today as the Southern Manifesto. They themselves referred to it as a Declaration of Constitutional Principles. And they said two things. Number one, they said an unelected judiciary, being the Supreme Court in DC, can't tell states what to do with education. And then number two, it said we as the rightful heirs, owners, and supporters of public education are going to decide what's best for our families. And so states said, hey, they've given us a nod from DC, what are we going to do? Well, a number of states decided to do a few things. One, they signed interposition laws, nullification laws, and they passed a battery of legislation, which basically said, we're going to give parents, and in most cases, it was only white parents, an opportunity to receive a tuition grant, to take that tuition grant, to leave public schools and to go to a private school. They also told families, guess what? Simply going to a private school isn't enough. We're willing to close the public school system in your area to make sure that Black and white students can go together. Well, guess what? And here in Virginia, from 1959 to 1964, the entire public school system for Prince Edward County shut down. Black, white, Asian, Native American, Hispanic, boy, girl. No one went to school in the public school system in this area. But you also had other areas in Virginia and elsewhere who closed it. And so thankfully, civil rights lawyers, NAACP, people in DC, philanthropists and others said, hey, we've got to put a stop to this. So 56 to 69 is what I would call the heyday of fear-based freedom of choice. And so I remind a lot of my colleagues in 2023 who support choice that when people make this claim, it's not too far outside of our own reality, but also not that long ago where fear-based choice was a factor. So that was then. I would say what you're talking about in Kansas, what I worked with starting in 1992 forward. and with the rise of what I call the freedom-based choice movement in 1990 in Milwaukee is where we are right now.
And let's talk a little bit about that. And I don't mean to get, too far out, over my skis here, but it does surprise me that people in Kansas, I mean, there's a beautiful mural in the Kansas State House that memorializes the Brown v. Board of Education case, but it's almost like we should maybe treat that as a little bit more of a black eye than we do here in Kansas, that it wasn't in the sense, forgive me, not that the case is the black eye, but the fact that Kansas had to be corrected by the U.S. Supreme Court to protect the rights of African-American kids. We should be recognizing that as something that needed to be overcome because Kansas wasn't getting it right. But then the other part of this is that we're still seeing pretty staggering achievement gaps between low-income kids or African-American kids and their higher income or white peers. So despite that promise of Brown that we should all be proud of, that we're recognizing that we're moving forward, that just hasn't worked. There are too many kids that are being left behind. And before we get into the kind of the freedom-based, where we are today, can you talk a little bit about maybe where that movement was in Florida or other states about how giving more families more opportunities, more accountability, things like this was actually driving the very achievement, the very opportunities that Brown was promising 70 years ago?
Yeah, and so I'm really clear that without the Brown v. Board of Education decision, without the work of the NAACP, Gerard Robinson, as a Black man, never would have had an opportunity to become Secretary of Education in Virginia, where I am right now, or commissioner in Florida. And so I know firsthand how important it was to break barriers for people to have opportunities to walk through different doors. And you're right. Even though Kansas, for example, wasn't a part of the Southern Manifesto that I discussed from 1956 to 1969, it in fact then was still a part of a movement that said we still want to close doors to families. And so I see the work that's taking place in Kansas, both in the public school sector and outside the public school sector, as another step toward the type of opportunity Brown looked for. Now, I'm very clear that when I say that, people say, wait a minute, Brown was not about private school choice. I said Brown was about family opportunity. Brown was about breaking barriers. Most of those barriers we still need to break are within the public school system, but there are opportunities where families said, listen, I'm a taxpayer. Your school isn't in fact giving me the opportunity I want. If I want to use a portion of my taxes to go to a private school, I should be able to do so. And so there's still a lot of debate about whether Brown was truly public, anti-private, but I know for one thing, it was pro-opportunity and pro-freedom. And so that's the lane in which I walk.
Right, and I didn't say that well just a second ago. I share your sentiments on the positivity of Brown and the recognition of those rights. Excuse me. I meant that Kansas should view it maybe as that wrong that was being perpetrated here in Kansas was righted by the U.S. Supreme Court. But let's talk about opportunity and what that means. You talked about the fear-based choice of kind of that post-Brown era. And let's talk about where we've been since the 90s, and then trying to fast forward as much as we can to where we are today with some of the educational choice options that are here. We had in the early 90s, Dr. Howard Fuller in Milwaukee, and then going forward about what that freedom-based choice looks like.
So you look at Milwaukee, some people have referred to it as the Selma of the North. It is one of the still most racially segregated cities in terms of basically Black and white that you're going to find in the country. They still have what I call racially identifiable schools, high poverty rate. When you look at NAEP scores, some of the largest Black-white achievement gaps in the country. We're talking in 2023. Well, go back to the late 1990s. Dr. Howard Fuller grew up in Milwaukee. He was a product of the system. He also later became superintendent. Well, imagine one day when he's having a conversation with a state lawmaker named Polly Williams, African-American woman who was involved in the civil rights movement. In fact, in the 1980s, she was a supporter of Jesse Jackson when he ran for US president, both in 84 and 88. She is someone who was a single mom, a strong Democrat, part of the civil rights establishment, who one day woke up and said, you know what? We've been fighting in Milwaukee a lot of the debates trying to get to where Brown wanted to go for us. Milwaukee had a busing program, mixed results, meaning some success, some challenges. They have a magnet school program, some success, some challenges. They, in fact, have a program to say, let's try and provide opportunities within the school system without having students move too far away. So she tried it and she said, we still have too many African-American students in our city who aren't getting it. So we have to try something different. So she, as a Democrat, went to the state, to the governor, who's a Republican, and said, listen, you want schools to work, I want schools to work, box check. You want Milwaukee, your largest city in the state, to be the economic engine for this state. So do I, you check a box. Third, can we agree that too many families, particularly low-income families, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, in this city aren't getting a great education? And they said, yeah. And so they decided to become the first modern state to experiment with what we call a voucher program, but it's really called the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program. And they started off with, a handful of schools, a handful of students who went initially to private schools, non-religious, with public money. Later, they decided to add religious schools. That offended a number of people. They sued, said you can't use public money for religious schools. That went before the state Supreme Court in Wisconsin. They argued in the Benson case, in fact, you could use public money for private schools. They did not offend the Establishment Clause. There was also initially a push saying that it was racist, or it was going to lead to racial segregation or issues with Blacks because of the 14th Amendment Protection Clause. They said, nope, that's not the case. Well, that experiment in Milwaukee also moved to places like New Orleans, also a city with a long challenge history with trying to integrate its programs. You also have a program in Washington, D.C. Why do I mention Washington, D.C.? One of the 5 areas covered or discussed in Brown v. Board of Education, although technically a different case because you had to use the Fifth Amendment for that case. So you have cities with civil rights leaders, and in most of these cities, including Cleveland, whose case reached the Supreme Court, these were African-American Democrats. These were civil rights leaders in their state. These were people who were comfortably Black, who understood exactly there were challenges, and willing to take on the establishment within their own party, and even the establishment in the school system, to say we're not anti-public school, we're pro-family, pro-opportunity, and we want to make things move. Not a perfect model, but I can tell you, none of the people that I've worked with in these cities who support ESAs, vouchers, tax credits, parental choice, are trying to take us back to the days of separate but equal, are not trying to take us back to the days of fear-based choice, but in fact are using legislation to make us, to move us to what I call freedom-based choice.
No, that's absolutely right. And I mean, you were the commissioner or the superintendent of public education now in 2 different states. So, I mean, it is a cliche, but maybe we can leave it with this, is how the idea of choice can also drive reforms and achievement and opportunities in the public schools as well. Because you and I, people who are tuning into this, everybody cares about getting a good quality education, and where it happens should be secondary. So we should be for parental choice if that's the right thing for those kiddos to go to a different kind of a school. We should be for high performing public schools. We should be for all of the above. And I know that's work that's close to your heart. It's something that you've worked on in 2 different states. So if you, any parting shots on that, and then we'll say thanks and wrap up. Appreciate it.
Well, parental choice existed long before the introduction of vouchers in 1990, and long before the introduction of ESAs. I mean, we have magnet schools, and those started in the 1970s. That's choice. Every state has what we call an open enrollment law, which allows students to cross boundaries to go to different schools. We have inter-district choice within the system, intra-district choice. We also have, these are also public choice schools, but we also have schools that allow students to pick a particular focus, a theme-based school. We have that. But we also have public money going to private schools. So the whole idea that public money can't go to private schools or religious schools is out of line with how schools actually work. According to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, going back to 1965 and its new iteration with Every Student Succeeds Act, if you are a Catholic school, for example, you receive Title I funding for low-income, help low-income students. You receive Title II funding to help teachers. This has been going on a really long time. In fact, we've had public money going to private schools beforehand. And you also had parents in states without private school choice laws who were able to receive tax deductions or tax credits for writing off expenses for books or other expenses for sending students to private schools, including private religious schools. So America has been a supporter of parental choice in both public and private sector, including private schools, long before the start of the freedom-based movement. But for some reason, when we talk in 2023 about introducing this, it's about segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, when I'm for freedom of opportunity today, tomorrow, and into the future.
Absolutely, Gerard. We really appreciate your time, your commitment to helping us out here in Kansas. And I promise the next time you're through here, we will take you out for some good barbecue in Kansas City. So we look forward to having you here very, very soon. And we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and keep up the good work.
All right, take it easy.
Take care.